Greetings, Culturians, and welcome back to the channel, and of course, the weekend of Kathleen Kennedy. That's right, with her disappearance, you gotta blame somebody for the massive failure that Star Wars has become. And of course, in typical Lucasfilm fashion, or at least modern Lucasfilm fashion, Kathleen Kennedy assures you it's the fans' fault. So, let's talk about it. Here we go. It's always the fans' fault, at least if you're Kathleen Kennedy. Nobody at Lucasfilm knows how to take accountability, and it has led to a lot of disappointment over the years. In fact, that should be the theme of everything and every studio controlled by Disney, is they're incapable, when they fail, of taking responsibility. Accountability is something that, well, they're just plain allergic to, and a lot of it has to do with the leadership and the specific leaders that are in positions of power. Kathleen Kennedy blames fans, misogynists, and bots for Star Wars Backlash. Not the material that they made, but obviously all these third parties that, for whatever reason, have a particular axe to grind with Kathleen Kennedy and her ilk. This story from cosmicbook.news, Matt's McGloin writing. Let's get to it. As Kathleen Kennedy exits Lucasfilm, she's pointing to fans as the source of Star Wars' biggest lows. Well, of course. It's your fault. It's my fault. Anybody who actually went to see it, paid money for it, and had higher expectations, well, you're the problem. The people who actually were invested in Star Wars that probably aren't anymore, you were the issue, and not the substandard delivery of terrible product and no innovation, nothing to get excited about, and a complete abandonment of everything that came before. That's definitely your fault because you were the writers, the producers, and basically everybody who worked on these projects, right? In her deadline exit interview, which I thought was hysterical that they couched it this way, when she was asked about the Star Wars highs and lows, Kennedy responded about the lows. Of course she did. It's the only thing that's on her mind. She claimed that only a very, very small percentage of Star Wars fan base caused the backlash that defined much of her tenure. According to Kennedy, these fans simply wanted the same thing. Well, yeah, we wanted the Star Wars, and we wanted it to be good. If that's the same thing, then guilty as charged. She says they were impossible to satisfy if Lucasfilm chose to go in a new creative direction or directions. And in this matter, perhaps she's not wrong. We demanded Star Wars to be Star Wars, the hero's journey, and the framework that was established by George to be followed. And, of course, adhering to the lore and the direction of the storytelling and not repurposing her for her own purposes was, well, just something that fans weren't going to support. And she was right. The lows are that you've got a very, very small percentage of the fan base that has enormous expectations. Well, we just expected good Star Wars. You didn't deliver. She adds that she wouldn't change any of the creative decisions she made while running the studio, which is a bad sign for the Disney theme parks because nobody's really invested in those attractions, and it shows. A small group that shut down Star Wars for years. Wow, that's saying it directly. Well done, Matt. However, Kennedy's comments immediately raise a credibility problem. If the backlash truly came from a tiny minority, it's hard to explain why Star Wars effectively disappeared from theaters for 7 years after the rinse of soybeans, the rise of Skywalker. It also doesn't explain why Lucasfilm reduced budgets and content on Disney minus. Actually, it kind of perfectly explains it. The fans, which are obviously not small in number, have walked away and no longer support it, as Disney Minus has had no growth in 3 years, which was reported in a recent Forbes article. We don't have high expectations for anything coming out of Lucas, especially after that disappointment of James Mangold, who, again, we have a story on later talking about his failure to make his film, but we'll get to that then. Let's continue on, saying Disney didn't pause theatrical releases and reduce content because of fringe audience. It's because the mainstream disappeared, I'm sure. The hiatus followed declining box office returns, stalled projects, and sustained audience pushback from a majority of fans. Studios don't freeze billion-dollar franchises because of a small number of loud voices online. It's impossible to argue with that. Thank you, Matt. The Last Jedi contradiction, which in Kennedy's own interview also undercuts her argument. Later in the same conversation, and you can read it on Deadline if you want to, she admitted that the reaction to The Last Jedi played a major role in driving Rian Johnson away from Star Wars. Good. He was terrible and barely is capable of making his own projects there, if you like the mystery onion bologna sausage stuff that Netflix produces. But despite The Last Jedi earning $1.3 billion worldwide, Kennedy said Johnson was spooked by online negativity after the film's release. And while it did dazzle in Asia, China specifically, I think that as people reflected over the disrespect that the film did to not just the previous films, but to the just prior film as well, it kind of derailed any kind of momentum that anybody had been thinking would exist after the second movie. It was no Empire Strikes Back for sure, and it certainly wasn't even Attack of the Clones. In fact, it was essentially attacking the fans, and that's what Rian Johnson turned to do. If the backlash was insignificant, why did it derail Johnson's planned return to the franchise? That's a good question. I seem to remember some kind of trilogy that this man was supposed to get, along with the trilogy that was going to come out of the recently failed Game of Thrones Season 8 co-producers and creatives that never actually landed, got produced, or was ever considered ever again. That admission suggests the criticism had real consequences, impacting filmmakers, future projects, and Lucasfilm's long-term plans, which it did. Or how about she even admits that she put Alden Ehrenreich in an impossible situation to play Han Solo, not once, but twice, which is kind of hilarious if you think about how many times they remade the Han Solo film that nobody had asked for. Kennedy points to misogyny and bots. Well, I don't know about misogyny, and I'm not certain that there are a lot of negative bots. There were certainly a lot of fluffer bots out there. But of course, Kennedy suggested that online harassment, particularly toward women's, played a major role in shaping the climate around Star Wars. That's because that's what she made the entire franchise about, Kathleen Kennedy. The Force was suddenly female and no longer honored the tradition of, well, what we'd seen on screen. She said she gives female filmmakers a heads up when they join the franchise. And the quote says, "I'm honest, especially with the women that come into the space because they unfairly get targeted. I don't try to scapegoat it, and I emphasize that it's a very small group of people with loud megaphones. I truly do not believe that it's the majority of the fans, and you would be mistaken." And I think we're also in this weird world of where bots can affect things. You have to develop a tough skin, but it's exactly right. That's what you have to do. You can't make it go away. And that's because the attacks that you claim are happening are actually legitimate in the sense that they're honest and direct criticisms of very poor ideas and poor delivery of content. Instead of acknowledging widespread dissatisfaction with projects, like I just pointed out, specifically with The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, or The Book of Boba Fett, which was disastrous in unique ways, Kennedy shifts the blame from herself and reduces the issue to trolls and bots. Would you expect her to do any different? I wouldn't. The story does go on to talk about her clear the Force's female agenda and the fact that it didn't work, and that was definitely the fault of the fans, right? Of course not. But her narrative doesn't hold across the board, which Matt brilliantly points out in this article over on cosmicbook.news, which I suggest you go and read. Regardless, Star Wars was for everybody until it wasn't, and that was ultimately your fault, because it's always the fans' fault, right? Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Do you think that Kathleen Kennedy was right and it was the fans who basically destroyed Star Wars? Or do you think perhaps it was Kathleen's fault herself for forcing a particular political agenda or ideology into a place where it didn't belong and had never been before? Or do you think something else was in the works that maybe I didn't even see while recording this video? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below, and I'd be willing to have a conversation about this, unlike Miss Kennedy herself, who is allergic to accountability. I'm accountable for what I say, and I'm okay with that. Be sure to take care of yourself, take care of others, and until next time, see ya. Just not watching Disney minus Star Wars. How about you?